Las Vegas was a city that never slept, but some nights felt more restless than others. Beneath the riot of neon signs and the pounding rhythms of slot machines, hidden currents of desperation pulsed through the veins of its people. For Mark Hanley, a seasoned blackjack dealer at one of the Strip's busiest casinos, every shuffle of the deck was both routine and mask, a well-rehearsed sleight of hand concealing a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The casino floor glittered with false promises, fortunes made and lost in the space of a heartbeat, tourists laughing too loudly to drown out their fears, cocktail waitresses moving like shadows in sequined dresses. Mark had learned to blend into this chaos, his hands steady, his smile professional. But the longer he stood beneath those endless chandeliers, the heavier his chest felt, as though each card he dealt pressed the weight of secrets further into his ribs. At home, the cracks had begun to show. His wife, Claire, noticed the way he lingered in silence at dinner, chewing slowly as if searching for words that never came. She noticed the tired way his eyes avoided hers, the half-smile that couldn't quite stretch across his face anymore. One night, while the glow from their apartment window reflected the Strip's neon skyline, Claire broke the silence. "Mark," she said softly, folding her hands on the table. "You've been distant. I don't mean tired. I know your job wears you down. This is different. What's going on?" Mark didn't look up from his plate. "It's nothing. Work's just heavier than usual." She leaned closer, her voice tightening. "I know you. I can feel when something's wrong." His fork clinked against the ceramic plate as he set it down. He looked at her then, eyes dark, unreadable. "Claire, I told you, it's just work." His words carried the weight of dismissal, final and sharp. Silence fell between them again, broken only by the faint hum of traffic below. Claire wanted to push further, but something in his expression, something like exhaustion mixed with warning, stopped her. She swallowed her questions and forced a smile, though her chest tightened. Later that night, when Mark stood at the window smoking, the neon lights danced in the glass. The reds and blues painted his reflection in fractured hues, as though even his own image betrayed him. He thought about the ledgers tucked away at work, the hands that shook his behind closed doors, the promises he'd made that could no longer be unmade. Claire watched from the bedroom doorway. She didn't speak. She simply observed the silhouette of her husband against the city glow, feeling the distance between them grow wider with each drag of his cigarette. The city outside seemed alive with contradictions, bright yet hollow, loud yet empty, a perfect mirror of their marriage. "Mark," she whispered into the dark, though he didn't turn. "I just don't want to lose you." His jaw tightened. He exhaled smoke slowly, letting it blur his reflection until even he couldn't see himself clearly anymore. The night carried on, indifferent, as the couple drifted further into silence. The neon lights outside burned relentlessly, a reminder that Las Vegas thrived on illusions, and Mark's life was becoming one of them. By morning, he was back on the casino floor, sliding chips across green felt with practiced precision, his face unreadable to strangers and familiar patrons alike. The neon glare no longer dazzled him. It only reminded him of the cost of living in a city that fed on secrets. And somewhere in the crowd, among the laughter and the clinking of glasses, a new pressure tightened its grip. The shuffle of cards was no longer just routine. It was a countdown. The casino floor was a theatre of illusions, and Mark Hanley was one of its most convincing performers. Every flick of his wrist, every measured smile, every casual joke with a patron was designed to disarm suspicion. To most, he was simply a dealer with steady hands and polite charm. To a select few, he was something else entirely, a gatekeeper in a game where money was laundered as easily as cards were dealt. High rollers came and went, their chips stacked high like miniature towers of ambition and greed. Mark's role was subtle, his actions so small they seemed invisible. A few chips, miscounted, a discreet exchange of colours, an envelope slipped beneath a felt cover when the cameras swiveled elsewhere. He was the middleman, the magician who made dirty money vanish into the endless churn of the casino's books. The trick was in the rhythm. He called it his perfect shuffle, not the mechanical blending of cards but the choreography of deception. Keep the chips flowing, keep the players satisfied, keep the pit bosses distracted. Every night was a balancing act, one slip away from exposure. Yet beneath the calm facade, Mark felt the weight pressing heavier. The gambler's laughter grated against his nerves, and the clink of chips began to sound less like profit and more like chains tightening. "Mark, you've got eyes on table 3, a floor manager asked one night, leaning down just enough to check his spread. "Always," Mark replied smoothly, offering the faint smile of a man in complete control. His voice betrayed nothing, though his stomach churned. Later, when a regular, a thick-set man with sharp eyes and too much cologne, leaned over the table, Mark's chest tightened. "You've been keeping things tidy, I trust," the man muttered, sliding chips into the betting circle with casual precision. Mark's fingers brushed over the cards, dealing with practiced grace. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Everything's clean. Don't worry." The man's grin was small, wolfish. "Good, because if it's not, somebody else will worry for you." The words sank into Mark's bones as he finished the hand, smiling for the crowd as though nothing had passed between them. But inside, dread coiled like smoke. Back at home, Claire felt the change before she knew the cause. He came home later now, the faint scent of tobacco clinging to his suit, the edge in his voice sharper when she asked about his day. She noticed the way he avoided leaving his phone on the counter, how he angled it away when messages buzzed after midnight. One evening, as they sat across from each other in their dim kitchen, Claire spoke again. "You weren't at work the whole time last night," she said quietly. "Your shift ended at 2. I heard the garage at 4. Mark froze, his fork suspended in mid-air. For a moment, the mask slipped. The panic flickered in his eyes. He quickly recovered, setting the fork down with a calm clink. "Claire, please," he said, his voice softer than before, almost pleading. "Don't start making things up. You're tired. You've been overthinking." Her lips pressed tight, doubt gnawing at her. "I just want the truth." "You have it," he insisted, though the way he said it felt more like a command than reassurance. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Claire stared at him, feeling the distance widen, the lie nestling between them like a third presence at the table. That night, she lay awake as he slept beside her. His breathing was steady, calm, but hers wasn't. The neon glow outside their window bled into the room, painting her thoughts in restless color. If Mark was hiding something, and every fiber of her being told her he was, she needed to find out what. As dawn broke over the strip, the city roared back to life, indifferent to her doubts. But Claire's suspicion was no longer fleeting. It had taken root, and soon it would grow into something Mark couldn't ignore. Claire Hanley had always trusted her instincts. It was part of what made her a good nurse. Reading the small signs in a patient's behavior, noticing what others missed. Now those instincts turned inward, sharpening against her own husband. The late nights stretched longer, his explanations grew shorter, and the silences between them became suffocating. Where once there had been laughter, now there was only the scrape of utensils on plates and the faint hum of neon filtering through the blinds. She started to notice patterns, the same suit worn on back-to-back shifts, the faint smudge of ink on his cuffs, the way his shoulders stiffened when his phone buzzed. Sometimes he would leave the room mid-call, his voice hushed, sharp, like a man gambling with words instead of cards. One evening, after Mark left for work, Claire pulled a notebook from her dresser drawer. She sat at the kitchen table under the soft yellow light and began writing. 15 a.m. Garage door opens. He said he finished at 2. Phone call yesterday. Didn't answer until he walked outside. Envelope on counter. Gone the next morning. The words spilled onto the page in tight, anxious lines. She wasn't certain what she was documenting, only that she needed proof. Proof that she wasn't imagining the distance growing between them. Her suspicions weren't born of jealousy, but fear. There was something darker than infidelity at play. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered too long on shadows, in the way he locked the filing cabinet when he thought she wasn't looking. 2 nights later, she tried to bridge the silence. "Mark," she said softly, as he loosened his tie in the living room. "Why don't you take a few days off? We could drive out of town, just us. Clear our heads." He froze for half a beat before tossing the tie onto the armchair. "I can't, work's too busy," her brow furrowed. "It's always too busy. Are you sure it's just work?" Mark's gaze snapped to hers, sharp enough to slice. "What are you trying to say, Claire?" "I'm saying I don't recognize you anymore," she whispered, her throat tight. "You're here, but it feels like you're not." For a moment, his expression softened, regret flickering in his eyes. But just as quickly, it hardened again. He shook his head, grabbed his jacket and muttered, "You're imagining things." The door closed behind him with a hollow thud, leaving her alone with the echoes of her own doubt. Claire pressed her palms against the notebook's cover later that night. Her handwriting looked frantic, as though her fear had seeped into the ink itself. She had crossed an invisible line, from suspicion into quiet investigation. The city outside continued to blaze with neon, the strip alive with revelry. But inside the Hanley apartment, silence pressed down like a weight. Claire sat in the dark, her notebook open on her lap, staring at the empty side of the bed. She didn't know it yet, but every line she wrote was leading her closer to a truth she wasn't prepared to face. And Mark, caught between secrets and survival, was running out of places to hide. The tension in the Hanley household had become unbearable. Every sound seemed magnified. The click of a lighter, the shuffle of papers, the uneven rhythm of Mark's breathing when he pretended to sleep. Claire felt like she was living with a stranger, a man who looked like her husband but moved like a shadow. Her notebook, hidden beneath sweaters in the dresser, had become her confidant. Each entry etched the truth deeper into her mind. The lies, the contradictions, the secrecy. Yet she didn't want proof on paper. She wanted the truth from his lips. One evening, she decided she could no longer live in silence. She waited until the dishes were cleared, until the faint hum of traffic outside softened, until the city's neon glow spilled through the blinds like an unwanted witness. "Mark," she said gently, almost a whisper. He looked up from the whiskey glass in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Yeah?" Her throat tightened, but she pressed forward. "Something's wrong. I know it. You're not just tired, you're hiding something from me." The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. Mark's hand stilled on the rim of the glass. "Claire," he said slowly, "you're imagining things again. You've been writing in that notebook, haven't you?" Her stomach dropped. He had noticed. "I had to," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Because you won't tell me what's going on. I see the late nights, the phone calls, the envelopes. I know you're in something you can't explain." Mark set the glass down hard enough to rattle the table. His eyes darkened, but beneath the anger flickered something else. Fear. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "It's work, Claire. Just work. You think the casino floor is easy? You think dealing cards to drunks at 2 a.m. doesn't take something out of you?" She shook her head. "Don't do that. Don't make me doubt myself. I know you, Mark. And whatever this is, it's bigger than your job." His chest rose and fell sharply. For a moment, his composure cracked. He leaned forward, voice low, almost pleading. "Claire, listen to me. Sometimes knowing too much is worse than not knowing at all. You need to trust me and leave it alone." Her eyes filled with tears. "Trust? You've built a wall between us. I don't even know who I'm married to anymore." The room felt suffocating. The neon glow painted them in shifting colors, red and blue bleeding across their faces like warning lights. Mark rubbed his temples, as though the weight of his double life was pressing too hard. Finally, he whispered, "I've made mistakes, things I can't undo, but I'm doing it for us, for you." The words slipped out like a confession, half-truth wrapped in desperation. Claire's breath caught. He had admitted something, but not enough. "What kind of mistakes?" she pressed. Mark's eyes hardened again. "Don't ask me that." The silence that followed was deafening. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward the door. "Mark, please." Claire's voice broke, but the door shut before she could finish. She sat alone at the table, her pulse racing. His words replayed in her head, each one a puzzle piece. Mistakes. Things I can't undo. For us. They didn't sound like excuses. They sounded like guilt. Claire's suspicions were no longer silent. She now carried his whispered confession, and with it, the certainty that whatever her husband was hiding, it could destroy them both. And tomorrow, she would begin searching for proof strong enough to tear down his walls. Claire couldn't sleep. Mark's words from the night before had burrowed into her chest like splinters. "I've made mistakes, things I can't undo, but I'm doing it for us." She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside her. His calm slumber felt like betrayal. How could he rest so easily with secrets lodged between them? By morning, her resolve had hardened. She needed answers, not half-truths whispered in frustration. If Mark wouldn't confess, she would uncover the truth herself. When he left for his shift, Claire began her quiet search. She opened drawers, checked pockets, lifted cushions. Most of what she found was ordinary. Receipts, loose change, a forgotten cufflink. But when she reached for the locked cabinet in his study, her pulse quickened. Mark had always kept it closed, dismissing her curiosity with casual remarks about work papers or casino policies. She fetched a thin nail file from her dresser. Her hands trembled as she worked the lock, every scrape sounding too loud in the silent apartment. Finally, the latch clicked and the door creaked open. Inside were folders stuffed with casino slips, player logs, and ledgers marked in hurried handwriting. Claire pulled one out, flipping through its pages. At first, the numbers meant nothing, but as her nurse's mind scanned the patterns, she noticed the anomalies, transactions that didn't add up. Stacks of chips exchanged without corresponding entries, amounts circled and rewritten. One envelope slid free, spilling its contents across the desk. Crisp bills in neat bundles, rubber-banded tight. Far more cash than any dealer's salary could explain. Claire's throat went dry. She pressed her palm against the bills, the texture sharp and undeniable. This wasn't just exhaustion, or late nights, or stress. This was laundering. Illegal. Dangerous. The kind of crime that didn't forgive exposure. She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "Oh, Mark, what have you done?" Her hands shook as she gathered the documents, returning them to their places as carefully as she could. She lingered over the notebook she had been keeping, tempted to write everything down, but fear stopped her. If he saw it, if he knew she had uncovered his secret, she wasn't sure how he would react. That evening, she struggled to hide the knowledge from her face. Mark walked through the door, loosening his tie, his eyes scanning her as if sensing the shift in the air. "You're quiet," he remarked, pouring himself a drink. Claire forced a smile, though her voice wavered. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment too long before nodding. "Get some rest." But rest was impossible. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed study door, her chest tight with fear. She wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, but the memory of his hardened expression, his veiled warnings, held her back. Instead, she confided in silence. Alone in the bathroom, she whispered into the mirror, practicing words she couldn't say to him. "You're breaking us. Mark, you're risking everything. I can't be part of this." Her reflection looked back at her, pale and exhausted, a woman standing at the edge of a truth too heavy to bear. Later that night, when Mark fell asleep, Claire lay awake again. The evidence was no longer hidden. It lived in her mind, clear and damning. Every page, every dollar bill, every inconsistency told the same story. Her husband wasn't just a dealer. He was part of something criminal, something dangerous. The neon lights outside flickered against the blinds, washing her in fractured color. Red, blue, yellow. It felt like a warning, a countdown. Claire knew she couldn't stay silent forever. If she didn't act, she would be complicit. But if she did, she wasn't sure what Mark, or the men behind him, would do to her. For the first time in her marriage, she felt not only betrayed but unsafe, and soon, unable to hold the weight alone, she would place her trust in someone else. Secrets were heavy things, and Claire could no longer carry hers alone. The folders, the ledgers, the cash, all of it pressed on her chest like a weight that made it hard to breathe. Every glance at Mark reminded her of what she had seen, of the truth she could never unsee. But fear, left in silence, becomes unbearable. She needed someone she could trust. She found herself dialing the number of her oldest friend, Jenna. They hadn't spoken much lately. Life and distance had pulled them apart. But Jenna had always been her anchor in moments of crisis. Claire's fingers trembled as she pressed the phone to her ear. "Claire, this is a surprise." Jenna's voice carried warmth, tinged with curiosity. "I need to see you," Claire whispered, her throat tight. "Please." "Not on the phone." They met at a small cafe off the strip, a quiet place where tourists rarely lingered. Claire sat across from Jenna, the smell of roasted coffee grounding her as she tried to steady her voice. "You're scaring me," Jenna said, eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" Claire's hands twisted in her lap. "It's Mark. I think he's involved in something illegal." Jenna leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I found records, cash, a lot of it. Transactions that don't make sense. He's laundering money through the casino. I know he is." For a moment, Jenna stared in stunned silence. Then she shook her head. Claire, this is serious. You can't sit on this. You need to go to the police. Claire's voice cracked. And tell them what? That my husband, the man I've shared my life with, is a criminal. Do you know what that would do to us? To me? Jenna's hand reached across the table, steady and firm. It's already done. If what you're saying is true, you're in danger whether you report it or not. You need protection, Claire. Claire's eyes burned with tears, but she nodded. Saying the words out loud had made everything too real to deny. They parted with promises to talk again soon, but Claire couldn't shake the dread that clung to her. As she walked back to her car, the neon of the strip blinked like 1,000 watchful eyes. That night, at home, she avoided Mark's gaze. She cooked dinner mechanically, forced laughter at his casual jokes, and pretended she hadn't just crossed the line that could unravel everything. But when Mark left the room to take a phone call, her stomach twisted. His voice was low, deliberate. Words she couldn't fully catch drifted down the hall. She's restless, watching too closely. Claire froze. The words cut through her, chilling her blood. He was talking about her. By the time he returned, smiling as though nothing had passed, Claire knew the truth. He was already suspicious. Her betrayal, meant as a desperate grasp for safety, had placed her in greater danger than she could have imagined. And Mark Hanley was not a man who forgave disloyalty. Claire's betrayal lingered like a storm cloud above the Hanley apartment. She carried Jenna's warning with her, a whisper that echoed louder each day. You're in danger whether you speak or not. And she knew Jenna was right. Mark had begun to notice the shifts in her behavior, the way she avoided his eyes, the sudden stillness in her body when his phone rang, the silence that fell whenever he entered a room. The distance between them snapped one evening. Mark came home earlier than usual, the faint smell of cigar smoke clinging to his jacket. He dropped his keys on the counter and studied her with unsettling calm, as though he were watching a hand of cards unfold, waiting for the right move. You've been quiet lately, he said, pouring himself a drink. The glass clinked against the counter, sharp and deliberate. I'm just tired, Claire replied, forcing her voice steady. Mark swirled the whiskey, his gaze never leaving hers. Tired, or hiding something? The words cut her breath short. She swallowed, her heart pounding against her ribs. What's that supposed to mean? He stepped closer, his presence heavy, looming. You've been restless, asking questions, taking notes. You think I don't notice? Her throat tightened. He knew about the notebook. Mark, she whispered, I just want the truth. That's all I've ever wanted from you. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. The truth? You couldn't handle the truth if I gave it to you. You'd run straight to someone else. Claire's hands trembled at her sides. I haven't, she began, but his eyes narrowed, silencing her. Don't lie to me, he said, voice low, dangerous. I know you've been talking. Who was it? A friend? The police? Her lips parted, but no words came. She felt cornered, exposed. Mark slammed the glass onto the counter, the sound echoing through the apartment. Do you have any idea what you've done? The people I work with. They don't forgive. They don't forget. And if they think you've turned against me, you won't just be my problem anymore. You'll be theirs. His words sank like lead into her chest. Fear rose in her throat. But so did defiance. You're the one who put us here, Claire said, her voice shaking yet strong. You did this, not me. You chose lies, secrets, dirty money, and now you're blaming me because you're scared? Mark's jaw clenched. For a fleeting moment, pain crossed his face. Pain she almost believed was real. Everything I've done, he said, quieter now, was to protect us, to give us more than scraps, more than this city will ever hand out to people like us. Tears welled in her eyes. Protect us? You've destroyed us. I don't even know who you are anymore. The silence that followed was unbearable. The neon glow outside the window flickered across his face, casting him half in light, half in shadow, as if even the city couldn't decide what he truly was. Finally, Mark straightened his shoulders. If you love me, Claire, you'll stop digging. You'll stay quiet. Because if you don't, we both know how this ends. The words were not a threat shouted in rage. They were a verdict delivered in cold certainty. Claire turned away, unable to meet his gaze. Her tears blurred the city lights into streaks of colour, like blood running down glass. She knew in that moment she had a choice. Obey his command and live in fear, or risk everything by stepping further into the truth. And somewhere deep inside, She also knew she was already past the point of no return. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of their apartment were closing in. Every corner seemed to carry Mark's shadow, every silence filled with the weight of his unspoken threats. She knew she couldn't stay under the same roof, not after his warning. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was survival. The idea came to her quietly, like a whisper in the back of her mind. A hotel room, anonymous, temporary, a place where she could breathe without his eyes following her. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would give her time to think, to plan her next step. She packed carefully, choosing only what she could carry in one small bag: clothes, her notebook, and the envelope of evidence she had copied from Mark's files. Her hands shook as she zipped it shut, the sound loud in the still apartment. When Mark left for his late shift, she waited until the echo of the garage door faded, then slipped out. The neon glow of the strip felt harsher than ever, as if the city itself were watching. The hotel she chose wasn't glamorous, nothing like the luxury towers where Mark worked. It was quieter, tucked a few blocks away from the chaos, its faded carpet and humming fluorescent lights a world apart from the casinos. At the front desk, she forced a smile, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "One night, maybe two," she said. The clerk barely looked at her, sliding a keycard across the counter. Room 408. Inside, the room smelled faintly of bleach and stale air. Beige walls, a small desk, a bedspread patterned with forgettable flowers. It was plain, but safe. She set her bag down and locked the door behind her, sliding the chain into place. For the first time in weeks, she exhaled fully, though the relief was thin and fleeting. She sat at the desk and opened her notebook. Page after page of notes stared back at her, ink stained with worry. She added a new line: hotel room. Can't go back tonight. Her plan was fragile but necessary. Tomorrow, she would meet someone Jenna had arranged. A lawyer, someone who could guide her without dragging her straight into police custody. She wasn't ready for the world to know, not yet, but she needed a lifeline. The hours dragged. She paced the small room, her nerves frayed. Every creak of the hallway made her jump. Every muffled voice outside the door felt too close. She double-checked the lock 3 times, her palms damp. By midnight, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. She thought about calling Jenna, about hearing a voice she trusted, but stopped herself. Too risky. If Mark was already suspicious, every call, every move could be traced. Instead, she whispered into the empty room, her voice breaking. "You're stronger than this. Just one more day. Just hold on." The neon outside the window flickered faintly, casting pale light across the carpet. It reminded her of their apartment, of the life she had fled, a life that felt further away with each passing hour. What she didn't know was that Mark had already sensed her absence. He had walked into the apartment, found the silence unnatural, the faint smell of her perfume lingering without her presence. His eyes had swept the room, landing on the empty space where her bag had been. He knew. By the time Claire curled beneath the thin hotel blanket, exhaustion finally overtaking fear, Mark was already moving. He wasn't guessing, he was certain. He had made a call, short and deliberate, and slipped the gun into his jacket pocket. The hotel, the anonymity, the fragile refuge Claire believed she had found. It was already compromised. And as the clock crept toward morning, the city outside glared in neon, indifferent to the collision that was drawing closer, one that would end not in silence, but in violence. Claire had barely closed her eyes when the knock came, sharp, deliberate, each strike against the hotel door slicing through the stillness. Her pulse surged. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with dread. She gripped the edge of the bed, breath shallow. Notebook and envelope pressed tightly to her chest. The knock came again, louder this time. "Claire!" a voice called, low and controlled, familiar. Her stomach dropped. "Mark!" She scrambled to the door, fumbling with the lock, her hands trembling. The chain rattled as she struggled, and for a moment, panic threatened to paralyze her. The voice outside was patient, dangerous in its calm. "Claire, just open the door. Let's talk." She froze. Talking wasn't what he wanted. She knew that. She could hear the weight in his words, the threat beneath the charm. Her eyes darted around the room for a place to hide, but there was nowhere. The hotel was meant to be refuge, but it had become a cage. The door clicked. The lock surrendered under pressure, And he was inside before she could react, the faint smell of cigar smoke trailing him like a shadow. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His presence alone filled the room, heavy and suffocating. "Mark, why are you here?" Her voice was barely audible, trembling. "I came for us," he said, stepping closer. Each movement measured, precise, like a dealer sliding chips across a table. "I want to fix this." Her eyes widened as he reached into his jacket, then froze as her gaze followed his hand. "Not a gun. Yet, not yet. I just needed space," she stammered, backing toward the bed. He didn't stop. "Space? Claire, do you think this is about space? This is about trust, about loyalty, about what we've built and what you're trying to destroy." Her notebook slipped from her hands, pages spilling across the carpet. She scrambled to gather them, desperation clouding her thoughts. "I'm not destroying us," she said, voice shaking. I can't be part of the lies anymore." Mark's eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "The lies are necessary. They protect us from people who don't care if we live or die. And now you've exposed us both." Claire's breath hitched. "Exposed? How? I've done nothing yet." "Nothing?" His voice sharpened. "You've reached out, whispered to someone else, tried to bring the law in. Do you understand what that means?" The threat hung in the room like smoke. Claire pressed herself against the wall, realizing fully that she wasn't negotiating anymore. She was pleading for survival. Mark stepped closer, his shadow stretching across her like a blade. "You left me no choice," he said softly, almost mournfully. Then, faster than she could react, the gun was in his hand, pressed against the side of his jacket, a weight she could feel in her chest. "No, Mark. Please," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Her mind raced, trying to find an escape, some way to diffuse the inevitable. But every route had disappeared the moment he crossed the threshold. His eyes softened briefly, a flicker of the man she once knew. "I loved you, Claire. I still do. But love isn't enough when the world doesn't play fair." The gun shifted, a warning, a promise. "I can't let them take you, or me. This ends tonight." The room fell silent except for the shallow rhythm of her breathing, mingling with the hum of the neon outside. Claire's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic tattoo against the quiet. Then, the inevitable happened. A sharp noise, a deafening crack, and the room seemed to shatter into fragments. Claire's vision blurred, neon streaks bleeding across the walls. She fell back against the bed, staring in disbelief, the notebook and envelope sliding from her hands once more. Mark's face was a mask of rage, fear, and anguish, the gun trembling in his grip. He sank to his knees beside her, and for a fleeting second, the man she had loved seemed to resurface behind the monstrous actions. The moment stretched, fragile and terrifying, until the distant wail of sirens reached the room. The sound pierced the tension, sharp as a scalpel. Mark's eyes darted toward the window, then back at her, realization dawning that the consequences of this night had begun before they could act further. Claire's chest heaved. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to escape, to survive. But she stayed frozen, caught between fear, love, and the stark truth. The life they had shared was gone. The neon lights outside continued their relentless flicker, indifferent to the chaos inside, and in that fractured glow, both of them understood. Nothing would ever be the same. The sirens were closer now, cutting through the neon haze of Las Vegas like knives. The hotel room, once a fragile refuge, reeked of fear and gunpowder, the air thick with smoke and adrenaline. Claire sat huddled against the bed, notebook abandoned on the floor, the envelope of evidence slipping from under her trembling hands. Her chest heaved as she tried to process what had happened. Mark was on his knees beside her, the gun now resting loosely on the floor, but the rage in his eyes had not diminished. He shook, voice low and raw. "Claire, I didn't want this. I never wanted it to come to this. You shot," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You shot me." "No, I—" His words faltered, and for a second, he looked as if he might collapse. The weight of his actions, the culmination of lies and desperation, pressed down on him like the neon light through the blinds. "It was supposed to scare you, make you listen, not—" But the words hung unfinished, meaningless now. Reality had arrived, and with it, the inevitability of consequence. The knock at the door was urgent, louder than before, followed by shouts. "Police! Step away from the door, now!" Mark's eyes flicked toward the keycard slot, then back at Claire. Panic surged in them both. He grabbed her arm gently, almost apologetically, as if trying to prevent her from moving. from facing the inevitable. Stay quiet. Don't speak, don't move. Trust me, he murmured. Claire's hands trembled. The notebook clutched to her chest, now forgotten. Her mind raced. Escape seemed impossible, yet compliance might be safer. Mark, please, we can't. They're here, she said, her voice shaking with fear and a strange, resolute clarity. The door rattled violently as officers shouted commands. Footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway, hard and relentless. Every thump against the floor, every crack of authority, reverberated through her skull. Mark's gaze fell on the gun again, then to her. His lips tightened, jaw rigid. I can't let them take us, he said under his breath, almost to himself, a man at the edge of everything he had hidden from the world. Mark. Stop, Claire pleaded. It's over. We can't, don't do this. The officers' voices were louder now, systematic, professional. Hands where we can see them. Now! Step away from the person inside. Mark's eyes darted toward the door, measuring, calculating. He had always been precise, meticulous, a dealer in both cards and deception. But precision faltered when confronted with inevitability. Claire's chest tightened, the adrenaline making her limbs heavy, yet clarity emerged. She realized that any wrong move could end everything. She gripped his arm firmly, holding his gaze. Mark, listen to me. We don't have to die here. We can survive this. Let them in. For a long moment, he didn't move, torn between the man he had been and the illusions he had constructed. Then, with a trembling exhale, he dropped to his knees fully, releasing the gun to the carpet. His hands rose slowly, fingers open, empty. The door burst inward, the room flooding with blue and red lights and uniformed presence. Officers shouted orders, weapons trained, voices commanding. Step back. Move away from the suspect. Claire's heart thundered as she instinctively stepped forward, reaching for Mark's shoulder. It's okay. It's over, she said, trying to calm both him and herself. Mark's shoulders slumped. Exhaustion, rage, and resignation etched into every line of his face. He let himself be guided to the floor, hands behind his head, the officers carefully ensuring no sudden movements. Claire watched, simultaneously relieved and devastated. The man she had loved, now stripped bare before the law, before reality, before the consequences of every secret he had carried. Officers began securing the room, confiscating the gun, checking for any immediate danger. Claire's breathing slowed only slightly, but the tremor in her hands persisted. Her eyes moved to the notebook, the evidence she had tried to protect, now in the hands of law enforcement. It was proof, undeniable and damning, the culmination of her silent investigation. An officer approached her, calm and professional. Are you okay, ma'am? We need to get a statement, but first, we'll make sure you're safe. Claire nodded mutely, unable to speak at first. Her mind replayed the events, the hotel, the confrontation, Mark's whispered confessions, the gun, the fear that had been so close to swallowing her whole. She was safe, but the relief was bitter. The price of truth was steep, and she had just paid it with every heartbeat that still raced through her chest. In the following hours, statements were taken. Mark remained in handcuffs, silent mostly, a man grappling with the realization of exposure. Claire watched, detached yet intensely present, as the officers documented everything, photographing the scene, taking her notes, collecting the envelopes and ledgers that had fueled her doubts. Later, sitting in the sterile glow of the police station, she tried to process the chaos. Fear had given way to exhaustion, adrenaline to a hollow clarity. The neon lights of Las Vegas, once symbols of glamour and illusion, now felt like witnesses, mocking, indifferent, distant. She thought of Jenna, the friend who had guided her, of the choices she had made, and of Mark, who had destroyed everything to protect secrets that had never been meant to remain hidden. She wondered about justice, about consequences, and whether any of it would heal the fractures left behind.